Sarah Williams had worked her whole life to get to where she was. As one of the few African American women in the FBI, she had overcome countless obstacles. Now she was finally trusted with an important undercover mission. The neighborhood she was about to enter was quiet and suburban, and on the surface, everything seemed calm. Sarah was aware that it could be a dangerous mission, but her focus was sharp. She had always prided herself on staying professional, no matter the situation. She parked her car a few blocks away from her target location, adjusting the badge clipped to her belt. The air was warm, but there was a nervous tension running through her body. As she made her way down the street, a black SUV suddenly slowed down and pulled over beside her. The windows rolled down, and Sarah was met with the cold stare of Officer Mark Daniels, a local cop. "Can I help you, officer?" Sarah asked politely, maintaining her professional tone. Officer Daniels looked her over with a sneer before rolling his eyes. He didn't even respond right away. Instead, he took a slow, exaggerated glance at her FBI badge, clearly unimpressed. The pause between them felt like it lasted much longer than it really did. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Something wasn't right about this interaction. "I'll be the one asking the questions here," Officer Daniels finally spoke, his voice dripping with disdain. "What are you doing around here?" Sarah felt a pang of frustration, but didn't let it show on her face. She was used to people doubting her, especially as a black woman in law enforcement, but she had learned long ago how to keep her composure. She took a breath and calmly replied, "I'm an FBI agent. I'm here on official business. I can show you my ID." Sarah reached for her badge, but before she could even pull it out completely, Daniel stepped closer, blocking her hand. "I don't need to see anything. I don't believe you," he snapped. His tone was sharp, and there was a sudden shift in his body language, aggressive and dismissive. Sarah, already trained to stay calm under pressure, gave him the benefit of the doubt for a moment. Maybe he was just having a bad day, she thought. But then his next words made it clear. This wasn't just about a bad day. "I said, I don't believe you. What are you really up to? Is this a scam, or are you trying to pull some kind of trick on me?" Daniel spat. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was no longer a simple traffic stop. She was being accused, harassed, and judged based solely on the color of her skin. In that moment, she knew this encounter was no ordinary situation. She stood her ground, refusing to let his words shake her. "I'm telling you the truth. You can check my credentials, but I need to be on my way. My time is limited." Daniel's eyes narrowed further, and his hand rested on his gun belt, an ominous gesture that made Sarah's pulse quicken. She had been in tense situations before, but something about this officer felt different, dangerous. "You're not going anywhere, lady," Daniel said, his voice low and threatening. Sarah's mind raced. She had to think quickly. She could easily overpower him, but that would only escalate things. Her training kicked in, and she decided to remain calm and cooperative, even though everything inside her screamed to stand up for herself. She'd been in tough situations before, but this was different. The officer wasn't just questioning her. He was challenging her existence. "Officer, please check my credentials," she said again, hoping reason would work. But as she reached for her badge, Daniel stepped back and placed his hand on the handcuffs at his waist, signaling to Sarah that the situation was about to take a dangerous turn. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as Officer Daniel stepped back, his hand still resting on his handcuffs. The situation was escalating faster than she expected. Her mind raced with thoughts, calculating her next move. She had been trained for moments like this, but no amount of preparation could have fully prepared her for the injustice she was experiencing right now. Her voice remained steady, though the tightness in her chest betrayed her calm exterior. "Officer, I am an FBI agent," she repeated, trying once again to get him to see reason. "You can verify everything. I'm not a criminal. I'm just doing my job." But Daniels wasn't listening. He stood there, glaring at her as if she were an enemy, not a fellow law enforcement officer. His eyes had no respect in them, only suspicion and something darker, something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just about her credentials anymore. This was personal. You think just because you're wearing that badge, you can do whatever you want. You don't get to walk around here like you're better than the rest of us. He snapped, his voice full of venom. His words stung, but Sarah wasn't about to let him see how much they hurt. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had been through tough situations in her career, but this felt different. She had seen prejudice and racism in small doses throughout her life, but nothing had prepared her for the direct hostility she was facing now. The officer wasn't just questioning her authority. He was questioning her humanity. "I'm not here to cause any trouble," she said quietly, trying to keep her tone calm. "I'm just asking you to verify my ID, and then I'll be on my way. We both know this is a misunderstanding." But Daniels was having none of it. He had already made up his mind. He stepped forward again, blocking her path completely. "A misunderstanding?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're a liar. There's no way you're a federal agent. People like you don't belong in jobs like that. You don't get to tell me what to do." Sarah could feel the anger bubbling inside her. How many times had she worked harder than everyone else just to prove herself? How many times had she faced situations where her worth was questioned simply because of her skin color? She had made it this far because of her abilities, not because of any handouts. Yet here she was, being treated as if her entire career meant nothing. "Please, I don't want to escalate this," Sarah said, her patience wearing thin, but her professionalism holding steady. "I'm just asking for your help. Verify my credentials. We can clear this up quickly." But Officer Daniels seemed determined to make it difficult. "Help," he scoffed. "You think I'm just going to take your word for it? You're going to have to prove it the hard way." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had no idea how to get out of this. Her mind raced. Was there a way to de-escalate this without drawing attention? Could she just get away from him and continue her mission? Or was this officer too far gone in his own prejudices? In that moment, she realized that this wasn't just about her. This was about all the people who had ever been treated unfairly because of their skin color, because of their background. And she couldn't let it slide. Sarah couldn't walk away and pretend it was a simple misunderstanding. She had to stand up for herself. With a resolve she didn't know she had, Sarah straightened up, squared her shoulders, and locked eyes with Daniels. She knew it was risky, but she wasn't backing down. "I'm telling you, I'm an FBI agent," she repeated one last time. "If you don't verify my credentials, I'll be forced to call my supervisor, and this will be reported." Daniels sneered, his expression full of disgust, but he didn't make a move. It was clear to Sarah that he was hoping she would back down, that she would be intimidated by his authority. But she wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. "Go ahead," Daniels said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Call your boss. I'm sure they'll back you up." But Sarah was done pleading. She knew she had to handle this with caution, but she wasn't going to let this officer treat her like she was nothing. She would fight for her rights, for her dignity, and for everyone who had ever faced the same kind of injustice. The tension between Sarah and Officer Daniels grew unbearable as he continued to stand there, blocking her way. His words were full of contempt, and despite all her attempts to stay calm, she could feel the anger rising inside her. She had worked so hard to get to this point in her career. And now, standing here on this street, she was being treated as though none of that mattered. Officer Daniels didn't move. His eyes narrowed in a way that made Sarah feel like she was nothing more than a target. He didn't see her as an FBI agent. He didn't see her as a human being with a job and a purpose. To him, she was just another person he could push around, and it was becoming increasingly clear that he was going to make this difficult for her. "Look, I've told you everything you need to know," Sarah said again, trying her best to keep her voice steady. "I'm here on official business. My badge proves it. You can check it. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just trying to do my job. But Daniels wasn't having it. He stepped even closer, his body language aggressive. I don't believe you. You're just a liar trying to get away with something. And I'm not going to let that happen. Sarah felt her heart race. She had never been in a situation like this before. As a seasoned FBI agent, she had faced countless dangerous situations, but she had never felt so disrespected and so unfairly targeted. She knew she couldn't back down now. Not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been treated unjustly because of their race. Without any warning, Officer Daniels grabbed Sarah's arm and twisted it behind her back, forcing her into an uncomfortable position. "You're under arrest," he said harshly, as if he were punishing her for something she hadn't even done. Sarah's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. How had things escalated so quickly? She had hoped that if she stayed calm and explained things, this situation would be resolved. But now she was being arrested, falsely accused. Just because of the color of her skin, it felt surreal. "I haven't done anything wrong," Sarah protested, trying to free her arm from his grip. She could feel the cold steel of the handcuffs tightening around her wrists as Daniel snapped them into place, all the while muttering about how she was going to learn her lesson. Sarah fought to remain composed, even as the feeling of injustice burned inside her. She had been through worse in her career, but nothing had ever been this personal. This wasn't about the law. This was about racism. Officer Daniels wasn't arresting her for anything she had done. He was arresting her because he didn't believe someone like her should hold a position of authority. The thought made her stomach churn. As Daniels led her toward his patrol car, Sarah noticed a few neighbors standing at their windows, watching the scene unfold. She couldn't help but wonder if any of them would speak up. But no one did. They just watched as she was shoved into the backseat of the police car. This was all happening so fast. Sarah barely had time to process what was going on before the door slammed shut behind her. She was now a prisoner in a small, cold police car, all because one officer had decided to let his prejudices take control. In that moment, Sarah's frustration gave way to determination. She knew she wasn't going to let this slide. She was an FBI agent. She had rights. And no matter what Daniels thought, she would make sure he paid for this mistake. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. She had been through hard times before, but this was a fight she wasn't going to lose. As the police car hummed along the street, Sarah could feel her pulse racing in her chest. The handcuffs were tight around her wrists, but it wasn't the physical discomfort that bothered her. It was the sheer injustice of it all. She had done nothing wrong. She was a professional. Yet here she was, being treated like a criminal by someone who should have been on her side. Officer Daniels had crossed a line, and Sarah was determined to make sure he faced the consequences. The car slowed as they approached the local police station, and Sarah's mind raced. She needed to call for help, but she couldn't do it from the backseat of this patrol car. Her thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear. She needed to get word out, and fast. She had a reputation to protect, and more importantly, a mission to complete. She knew she had to stand up for herself, but she couldn't do it alone. As the car came to a stop, Officer Daniels opened the door and roughly pulled her out. The air was cool, and Sarah shivered slightly, not just from the temperature, but from the situation she found herself in. She was led into the station, her hands still cuffed behind her back, and everything felt surreal. This couldn't be happening. She had never felt so helpless in her life, yet deep down, she knew she had the power to turn this around. She just needed the right help. Inside the station, she was placed in a small, dimly lit holding cell. Officer Daniels left her there without a word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as he walked away. Sarah sat on the cold bench in the cell, the sound of the door slamming shut reverberating in her ears. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. This wasn't just about her freedom. It was about proving that she couldn't be treated this way just because of the color of her skin. She knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, But she wasn't about to back down. Her first priority was to contact her supervisor, Agent Kevin Harris. He would be the one to get things moving. Sarah knew that the FBI had resources, and they wouldn't let this kind of injustice slide. She had to find a way to make the call. Her mind raced, and then it hit her. She had her phone in her pocket when Officer Daniels first stopped her. It was still there. She stood up and began to tug at her pants pocket, her fingers trembling as she worked to get her phone out. The cuffs were still tightly secured around her wrists, making it difficult, but with determination, she managed to free the phone from her pocket. Her heart raced as she unlocked the screen with her thumb. She didn't have much time. She quickly dialed Agent Harris' number and pressed the phone to her ear. The phone rang once, twice, and then the voice she had been waiting to hear came through the line. "Agent Harris," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "It's Sarah. I need help. I've been arrested," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "By Officer Daniels. He's charging me with obstruction. But it's all a lie. I need you to get me out of here." Agent Harris's voice immediately became more serious. "Stay calm, Sarah. We'll get you out. I'll make some calls and have someone there to take care of this. Just hold tight, okay?" Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I'll hold on. But please hurry. This officer, he's been nothing but rude and discriminatory from the start. I need to get out of here before it gets worse." "I understand. We'll make sure everything gets sorted," Agent Harris said. "I'll be in touch soon." The call ended, and for a moment, Sarah let out a breath she didn't even realize she'd been holding. She had done it. She had reached out for help. And now, all she had to do was wait. But waiting wasn't easy. With every passing second, the weight of the injustice pressed harder on her chest. She couldn't believe that just a few hours ago, she had been confident and on top of her game, walking into a simple assignment. Now she was stuck in a cold cell, falsely accused, and completely at the mercy of a system that seemed to be failing her. Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The fight ahead would be long, but she was ready. She wasn't going to let Officer Daniels or anyone else get away with what had just happened. With Agent Harris on the way, she knew things were about to change. Hours passed as Sarah sat in the holding cell, her mind swirling with thoughts. The weight was unbearable. She had made the call to Agent Harris, and now all she could do was hope that he would come through. She knew he had the power to make things right, but the frustration of being trapped here, unjustly, was taking its toll. She had faced countless dangerous situations in her career, but this was different. This wasn't about catching criminals. It was about proving that she was worthy of the same respect as anyone else, no matter her race. The holding cell was cold, and Sarah could hear the murmur of voices outside. She strained to listen, hoping to catch some sign that someone was taking her case seriously. But all she could hear was the occasional clattering of keys and footsteps echoing down the hallway. The hours felt like days, but she refused to give in to panic. Just then, the door to the cell opened. Sarah stood up quickly, her heart pounding, hoping it was someone from the FBI. To her relief, it was Agent Harris, his face set in a stern, determined expression. "Sarah," he said, his voice low but steady, "we've got your back. This isn't going unnoticed." Sarah exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. She had been dreading what would happen if no one took her side. But now, standing in front of her, Agent Harris was a reminder that there was still hope. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with him on her team, she was no longer alone. "Thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't know how long I could stay calm in here. Officer Daniels, he's not just a bad cop. He's been looking for a reason to take me down. It's not just about this arrest. I think he has something against me." Agent Harris nodded. "We're already looking into Daniels. We've had some concerns about him for a while now. This situation has only brought them to the surface." As Sarah was escorted out of the holding cell, she felt a small sense of victory. She wasn't completely free yet, but the fact that someone was investigating Officer Daniels gave her a sense of relief. She wasn't going to be swept under the rug. Once outside, Agent Harris handed her a phone. "We've got a team working on this. We'll take care of everything. Just stay patient. This isn't over." As she dialed her supervisor's number, Sarah couldn't help but wonder how much longer this was going to take. She had no idea how deep the corruption went in the local police department, but she knew this arrest wasn't an isolated incident. Officer Daniels wasn't the first person to let his prejudices take over. It wasn't just him, it was the system. And that was what Sarah planned to fight. The next few days were a whirlwind. Agent Harris and the team had already started gathering evidence. They combed through Daniels' history, speaking with witnesses, and reviewing footage from body cameras and nearby security cameras. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Daniels had a long history of discriminatory behavior, and now, with the spotlight on him, everything started to unravel. Sarah's case wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about exposing a culture of racism and inequality that had gone unchecked for far too long. The investigation into Officer Daniels grew broader, and soon, the whole department was under scrutiny. At the same time, the media began to take notice. News outlets picked up the story of the FBI agent who had been falsely arrested by a racist officer, and the public was outraged. Sarah had become the face of a larger fight, a fight she hadn't expected, but one she was ready for. Every day brought new developments. Witnesses who had been too afraid to speak out before now felt empowered to come forward. Evidence mounted against Officer Daniels, and his reputation continued to crumble. The investigation revealed that he had a pattern of targeting black and minority officers, and that his prejudices were well known among other officers, but no one had ever spoken out. For Sarah, the investigation was more than just about justice for herself. It was about making sure this never happened again to anyone else. She wasn't just going to let this moment pass. She was going to make sure the system changed. She would keep fighting for as long as it took. Sarah sat in her office, staring at the pile of reports in front of her. The investigation into Officer Daniels was moving forward, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Every day, she received updates about the growing support from the public, the witnesses coming forward, and the pressure building on the local police department. But she knew that no matter how much momentum they gained, the fight was far from over. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was Agent Harris. She quickly picked it up, eager for the latest news. "Sarah," Harris said on the other end of the line, "the department's starting to crack. We got more statements from officers who've worked with Daniels. He's been intimidating others, and now they're talking." Sarah allowed herself a small sigh of relief. "That's good, but it's not over yet, right? We're not out of the woods." "No, not yet. We're still gathering evidence, but things are starting to fall apart for him. It's clear he's been abusing his position for a long time. It's just a matter of time before we get the breakthrough we need." Sarah couldn't stop herself from feeling a sense of accomplishment, but she also knew that what they were uncovering was just the tip of the iceberg. This was about more than just one officer. It was about an entire system of injustice that had been allowed to thrive. The fight was much bigger than she had originally imagined. "I'm not going to stop until we get everything," she said, determination in her voice. "This isn't just about clearing my name. This is about making sure no one else has to go through what I did." Harris was quiet for a moment before responding. "I know, Sarah, and we're with you every step of the way." The conversation ended, and Sarah set the phone down. As much as she appreciated the support, she knew the real work was just beginning. The case was already starting to gain attention outside the FBI. Local news stations had picked up the story, and the public was demanding answers. People were rallying behind her, but Sarah understood that the battle would only get harder from here. She couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been discriminated against, for every officer who had ever faced prejudice, and for every person who had been wronged by the very system that was meant to protect them. Days passed, and the investigation continued to unfold. As more officers spoke out about Daniels's behavior, it became clear that his actions weren't isolated. Several of his colleagues had seen his discriminatory tendencies and had even been victims of his harassment. Yet they had been too afraid to speak up until now. With Daniels facing mounting pressure, others began to see an opportunity to take action. The media coverage grew more intense, and soon protests were organized outside the police department. People were calling for accountability. Signs reading "Justice for Sarah" and "End Racism in Policing" filled the streets. The public's support gave Sarah a sense of hope, but she knew that the real work was still ahead. The FBI began putting pressure on the local department to take swift action. Daniels's days as a police officer were numbered, but the department's reluctance to act was still a concern. Sarah, however, wasn't going to let that slow her down. She knew that sometimes the only way to create change was to keep pushing, no matter how hard it seemed. As the investigation moved forward, Sarah found herself working around the clock, poring over evidence and coordinating with Harris. The fight was exhausting, but she refused to let up. The thought of letting Daniels, or anyone else, get away with this injustice was unbearable. She knew the stakes were high, but she was more determined than ever to see this through. Her phone rang again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Harris once more. "Sarah," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "We've got him. We've got everything we need to take down Daniels. He's been lying about his entire history, and the evidence is solid." A smile tugged at Sarah's lips. After everything she had been through, this moment felt like a victory. "It's over then?" she asked, almost not believing it. "It's over," Harris confirmed. "We've got him, and now we can move forward with the case. The department is going to have to answer for everything." Sarah's heart swelled with relief. The fight wasn't completely over, but this was a major turning point. Daniels was going down, and the corrupt system he had been a part of would be held accountable. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in a while, Sarah felt like they were finally on the path to justice. The day of the trial arrived, and the tension was palpable. Sarah sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was packed with people, some there to support her, others to see the drama unfold. Cameras flashed as reporters jotted down notes, eager for any details they could report. Sarah's gaze was fixed ahead, focused on the judge's bench, where the judge would soon take his seat. She was ready. She had to be. This was it. The courtroom was quiet, save for the shuffling of papers and the hushed murmurs of those around her. Officer Daniels sat on the opposite side, flanked by his lawyer, looking much less confident than he had when he arrested her. He kept his head down, glancing nervously around the room. Sarah couldn't help but notice the difference between the man who had tried to tear her life apart and the man sitting before her now, clearly on edge. She had faced him before, but now, in the courtroom, the stakes were higher than ever. The judge entered the room, and the court fell silent. He sat down and motioned for everyone to stand. Once everyone had taken their seats, the proceedings began. Sarah could feel her palms growing sweaty, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. She was the one in the right. She wasn't going to let Daniels or anyone else take that from her. Her lawyer stood up to present the case. He was calm, confident, and clear in his arguments. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are here today because one officer decided to let his personal prejudices dictate his actions. Officer Daniels arrested an innocent woman, a woman who serves this country as an FBI agent. All of this was based on nothing more than his own hatred and racism. This trial is about much more than one wrongful arrest. It's about accountability, it's about justice, and it's about the truth coming to light." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. She could feel the weight of the room's attention on her, but she held her head high. She had spent years fighting for justice, and today was no different. The evidence they had gathered, Daniels's history of discrimination, witness testimonies, and the security footage that clearly showed his hostile behavior, was all there. There was no denying the truth anymore. As her lawyer continued, Sarah couldn't help but think back to the moment when Daniels had first grabbed her arm. She remembered the disbelief she had felt, the helplessness, and then the determination that had followed. Now, sitting here in the courtroom, she felt the full weight of that journey. This was the moment she had been fighting for. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wronged. When it was Daniels' turn to speak, his lawyer tried to make his case. They argued that Sarah had been disrespectful and had resisted arrest, twisting the narrative in an attempt to make it seem like Sarah was the one who had caused the situation. But Sarah knew better. The evidence didn't lie. The truth was on her side, and it was clear to everyone in the room. The jury listened carefully, weighing both sides of the argument. Sarah felt her nerves start to settle. She had done everything she could. She had told the truth, and now it was up to the jury to decide. Then came the most powerful moment of the trial. Sarah was called to the stand. She took a deep breath before stepping up, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She was calm, but inside, her heart was racing. She could do this. She had to do this. The prosecutor asked her to recount what had happened that day. Sarah explained, in clear detail, how Officer Daniels had approached her, how he had refused to believe she was an FBI agent, and how he had arrested her for no reason other than his own prejudice. She spoke with authority, but she also spoke from the heart. She shared how it felt to be treated that way, how it felt to be judged before she even had a chance to explain herself. As she finished her testimony, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had spoken the truth. There was no turning back now. She had given everything she had, and the rest was out of her hands. The trial continued with closing arguments, and then it was time for the jury to deliberate. Sarah sat in the waiting room, surrounded by her team, waiting for the verdict. The minutes felt like hours, and with every passing second, she wondered what the outcome would be. Would they believe her? Would they side with Officer Daniels? Finally, the jury returned, and the courtroom fell silent once again. The judge called for everyone's attention. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. The jury foreman nodded, holding up a piece of paper. "We find the defendant, Officer Mark Daniels, guilty of racial discrimination and false arrest," the foreman announced. The courtroom buzzed with energy as the verdict was read. Officer Daniels was guilty. Sarah could hardly believe the words she had just heard. For so long, it had felt like a distant hope, something she dreamed about but never truly expected. But now, here she was, standing in the middle of the courtroom, her heart racing with both relief and triumph. The victory wasn't just hers. It was a victory for everyone who had been wronged, silenced, or dismissed because of who they were. Sarah stood up from her seat, her knees slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment. Her lawyer, who had been by her side through every step of this battle, gave her a reassuring smile. He knew what this meant. It wasn't just about winning a case, it was about setting a precedent, about making sure something like this would never happen again. The entire courtroom seemed to echo with applause as Sarah made her way to the front, where the judge was waiting. "This court finds Officer Mark Daniels guilty of racial discrimination, wrongful arrest, and violation of the rights of Agent Sarah Williams," the judge declared. The words rang out, clear and firm. "Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. Officer Daniels will be stripped of his badge, and an official apology will be issued to Agent Williams." The sound of the judge's gavel ringing through the courtroom felt like a final, resounding confirmation. Sarah had fought, and she had won. Officer Daniels had tried to break her, tried to strip her of her dignity and career. But instead, he had been exposed for what he truly was, a man who let his prejudice cloud his judgment and his role as a law enforcer. As she stood there, accepting the applause from the people in the room, Sarah's mind wandered for a moment. It wasn't just about the courtroom or the arrest anymore. It was about everything that had led her here. The years of work she had put in as an FBI agent, the way she had fought against unfairness and bias at every step, and the relentless pressure to prove herself. All of it had come down to this one moment, where justice had finally been served. Outside the courthouse, news crews gathered to cover the outcome of the trial. The story had gained national attention, and reporters were eager to hear from Sarah. Her attorney spoke to the press, commending her bravery and the courage it took to stand up to a corrupt system. "This is not just a victory for Agent Williams," he said, "but for every person who has ever faced discrimination. Today, we have shown that no one is above the law." Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to speak yet, but she knew she had to. She had a message, not just for the reporters, but for everyone who had been watching, waiting for something to change. As she stepped up to the microphone, she felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest. The cameras clicked, capturing the moment when she finally had the chance to speak her truth. "I'm standing here today because I didn't let fear stop me," Sarah began, her voice steady. "I didn't let a single person define who I am or what I stand for. Officer Daniels tried to make me feel small, but what I've learned through this journey is that no one can take away your strength unless you let them." She paused, looking at the crowd. "This fight was never just about me. It was about every person who has ever been judged because of the color of their skin. It's about breaking down the barriers that have kept so many of us from reaching our full potential. Today, we proved that justice can be done, even when it feels impossible." The reporters scribbled down every word, capturing the power in Sarah's statement. The crowd cheered, and for the first time since her wrongful arrest, Sarah felt like she could breathe fully again. This victory was more than just a personal win. It was a symbol of what could happen when people stood up and refused to accept injustice. As Sarah walked away from the courthouse, flanked by her colleagues and supporters, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The journey had been long, and the scars of the battle would remain with her, but she knew they were part of something bigger now. She had opened a door for others to walk through, for others to feel empowered to speak out when faced with discrimination. Officer Daniels' downfall was only the beginning. Sarah knew there was much more work to be done, but today she allowed herself a moment to feel proud. She had done what she set out to do. She had stood up for herself, for her colleagues, and for everyone who had ever faced injustice.